To introduce someone to the concept of Pokémon is a lot like showing someone an ant farm. It can feel somewhat redundant because they probably already have a grasp of the concept. Perhaps they remember them from when they were younger but grew out of it. Maybe they keep hearing about them and think there are too many ants nowadays. Maybe they think the artistry of the ant farm has been melted down to a bland pipeline of slop just to sell more ant-related media. And hell, maybe they were one of the weird kids who not only liked ant farms, but would carry one around with them trying to catch ants wherever they went. But only a handful of freaks would do something like that, right?
So I am currently at Pokemon Go Fest 2025. There is about 80 billion people here, I think, all taking on the same very exciting challenge of trying to find more shiny Pokemon, or more of the homeless.
Pop culture is intrinsically a media-based platitude. You can find instances of outliers, but they'll be just that, outliers. As new forms of media developed through the 90s, pop culture itself went through that same change. And one of the biggest keystones of that evolution was Pokemania.
Pokemon. Almost every Japanese child knows Pocket Monsters and its star, Pakucho.
Remember Palworld? That's a leading recent example of a game. In the first 3 months after its launch, Palworld sold 26+ million copies. In that same span of time in 1998, the original Red and Blue sold only 4 million. Okay, maybe not the best graph for my point. But I mean, anyone can cherry-pick data to their benefit. We'll just measure financial sales instead of copies, adjust for inflation, of course, and let's do IP value, not just game sales. Oh, also one was a flash in the pan and the other was
from the 90s and still going.
If you weren't alive in 1998 to experience this craze, you haven't yet lived through a comparable to it. It teeters on terrifying how giant this brand has gotten. It's as if these games were fentanyl and the entire world was Baltimore, Maryland. Just by the nature of how much more stuff is out there today, it might not even be possible for something to be as all-encompassing as Pokemon ever again. So now going back to our graph, here are the downloads of Palworld in its first 30 days, and here's the first 30 days of installations for Pokemon Go. It's not my intent with this video to recount the entirety of this game's history. You likely already know the monolithic attention this game got the summer of its release, which was just a watered-down, nostalgic-powered rerun of its relevance from over a decade before. I get not everyone might have been around for the pandemonium that was Pokemon in the 90s. If you weren't around for this in 2016, go ask your parents to better monitor your internet usage, you fucking baby. The transcending popularity, the mobs of people, the dead bodies, the dishonorably charged policeman, the Pidgeotto I found on Cape Breton Island that fucking ran from me. Much like the game's preceding and following it, there isn't a lot to dissect here from a gameplay perspective. What is and always has been the appeal is the Pokemon. Catching them all, in so many words, is as much a slogan as a mission statement. The brand is what got everyone's attention, but where that attention began to diminish was about here. It was still a gargantuan-sized player base, but the world's attention was long gone.
Pokemon go to the polls!
To say it was anything but overhyped, it was also definitely undercooked. With maybe the biggest server load in gaming history, the app was so bug-ridden and unresponsive you'd think it'd need an autopsy. It's extensively well reported to have been released early and quite literally unfinished in some aspects, and consequently spent every update for years after solely playing catch-up. The Johto roster of Pokemon was integrated to add content in February 2017, but the bare-bones gameplay structure didn't keep many around long enough to care. And as fewer and fewer people stuck around after that tidal wave of initial interest, it would just continue to dry up, somehow get better during a pandemic, then back to worse in the years after that. Was the game just never meant to hold that much attention? No, they clearly did something to recoup and garner recognition outside the IP. But what no graph is going to tell you is the numerous ridiculous, unexplainable, ludicrous business decisions made by this game to actively sabotage its own player base. Like, per se, literally and intentionally cutting its own gross profits in half. Pokemon Go is essentially a case study of a kamikaze of a video game. But on what authority would I have to divulge all this? How could I possibly act as judge to all these alleged crippling developer mistakes and the debauchery of one of the world's most beloved IPs? Because the biggest mistake this game ever made was having me as an engaged player for 7 years. I will never seek nor truly accept love from others, so I can only assume I look at this game today like a bitter ex. I don't entirely regret my time with it, and I'm okay that I loved it, even though I basically hate it now. I still like the idea of it, but detest it in its current form. Maybe the most potent part of this X metaphor I've set up is I've invested thousands into this thing, and I'll never get it back. If I'm gonna make this big claim about this being one of the worst managed games in history, no better starting point comes to mind than the game's first real big fuck up. So here is, in summation, at a time when the game's player base was around its all-time lowest, the development company of the game, Niantic, would announce maybe the most significant and scrutinized blockbuster feature in the game's history. What can I tell you about Niantic? Give me a little longer, you gotta build up to these things. A ticketed in-person festival, as it was coined, at Grant Park in Chicago, Illinois, hosting newly added raid bosses, the game's first ever debut of legendaries, immersive real-life habitats, team lounges, influencer meetups, in-game challenges and rewards, exclusive spawns like Heracross? I mean, who wouldn't fly across a continent for a Heracross?
Shut up and take my money!
For only $20 a ticket, too. I mean, is there any reason this doesn't sound like a blast? A telling omen for this festival was probably that tickets to attend it went live before its details were even announced, and 15 minutes thereafter sold out, still before anyone knew what they were for. I also really want to emphasize the extremely real fact that thousands of people drove or flew significant distances to attend this. This wasn't a touring concert, this was the only place in the world where it was happening, so you could either get on board or get left at home.
This family of 5 flew in from Los Angeles, spent thousands of dollars. They love this game like nobody's business.
The line was wrapped around the entire park, and I met several people who said they were waiting in line for over 3 hours to get in.
Crushed. Absolutely crushed by what was going on.
So on July 22nd, 2017, approximately 20,000 people conjoined at this section of Grant Park, all of whom attempting to use GPS services on their phone at the exact same time. Do you care to guess what you think happened next?
There's a Heracross right. Oh shit.
You can get in, definitely connect.
Yeah, but it was all in good fun. We weren't angry. We were all having fun.
Cell towers in every adjacent mile went down, mobile networks were so overloaded they shut down, nobody could even log in, and those who could were subjected to an even buggier non-functioning mess than the buggy non-functioning mess it already was. There was a stage, this sort of fan shell in the center of the park that the entire day, every time some little show or trivia game happened, it would endure a hellfire of boos from a crowd of thousands of people simply because they had nothing better to do. The people who went up there, they weren't bombing acts, not performers, some not even speakers, just trying to mediate this apocalypse they had zero control over. No heckling, no revolts, just unceremonious plastering of boos at whatever they did and whatever they said until they left. I only hope they have the strength to laugh at it now.
So the party was going great.
The event ended at 5 p.m. 2 hours before scheduled. The event runners tried to ramify the digital conjunction to minimal effect.
You blew it!
And the big showstopper, about 7 hours after the show had been stopped, planned for the end of the day the first release of legendaries Articuno and Lugia had to be made available across downtown Chicago and extended an additional 2 days. Every attendee was given a free Lugia inserted into their account, $100 of in-game currency, their tickets refunded, and split among those participating $1.575 million to accommodate flights and hotels to thousands of victims in a class action lawsuit.
They have this grand vision for this, right? This is what we want our game to be, but their tech is just not there. And it's very clear. They've had a year!
If you're coming for the game and not like all this other stuff, like you want the game to work.
So many people in the park today.
A lot of people.
Now we have a little bit of an issue
You can hear all of them
connecting.
yelling.
There was more than just a nugget of a good idea here. There was legitimately a very unique experience to be had at an event like this, which, even through the barrage of shit I just told you about, still revealed itself at times. The primary and obvious issue was connectivity, with zero preparation being put into additional cell towers or network provider coordination or any of the like. The rest had quirks to polish out to prevent an outcome like this again, but the primary flaw was outed and this oversight would never happen again. Pokémon Go Fest 2018. Same event, same city. After every red flag possible was brandished the previous year, they just did it again. And you're never gonna believe this, but it was actually a nearly seamless and much improved experience. Not perfect, but generally remembered positively. No notes.
What? I'm not even doing anything.
Drop dead.
But then what about 2019? Well, it was also a very successful venture, improving on nearly every aspect from years prior, and still generally regarded as the best event in the game's history. But then what about 2020? I wasn't exactly sure when this would come up, but it's maybe the most fascinating period of this app's history. See, there were some external factors preventing a Go Fest from happening in 2020. By now, the 2016 version of this game that had lived by its infamy had also died by it. The version in current year had rejuvenated itself from App Store oblivion through a myriad of updates and features. The aforementioned raids gave a real purpose to getting stronger Pokémon. Events, not the big real-world gatherings, but like little in-game ones that would change spawn tables or give little bonuses that would typically happen 2 to 3 times a month, now basically occurred every day of the year. Gym battles were reworked to still be pretty shitty, but slightly better. Research tasks, research breakthroughs, community days, raid days, EX raids, research days, Go Battle League. It took 4 calendar years to add PvP to a Pokemon game.
What's wrong with you?
Team Go Rockets, Safari Zones, buddy systems, friends list, tags, avatar outfits, shinies. Do you understand how insane this all is? I don't think everyone watching this is oblivious to the game after 2016, but you have to understand the revolution that happened because of these additions. They're revered as the norm today, but back then, something interesting to do. It was unheard of.
All your needs will be...
No, we wanted global trading.
Throughout 2019, Pokemon Go had not only completely reinvented itself, but it was also assimilating into the game it was always envisioned to be. So what does a game whose entire X factor is playing and interacting outside do when the outside is no longer an option? Niantic. Still not there yet, by the way.
You can't keep getting away with...
So what's their deal? We're gonna spend a lot of time dissecting their decisions, but for right now, let's just think about the situation they're in. Your entire multi-billion-dollar business model relies on people going and playing your game outside, and is objectively not able to be experienced without moving. And for the next several months, if not years, moving is no longer an option. What's your pivot? Well, announced on March 20th, 2020, here's what they came up with. Spawn mechanics of Pokemon would be changed to allocate demonstrably more spawns to rural and suburban areas, as well as significantly more clusters of spawn patterns in those aforementioned places. The walking requirement to Battle and Go Battle League was completely removed. The interaction distance of gyms, stops, and raids all got increased to 80 meters instead of the previous 40. A bunch of other changes we'll just call not relevant to this tangent. And a new item titled the Remote Raid Pass was released, giving holders the ability to join a raid battle from their visible vicinity, or with an invite from a friend around the world from, well, anywhere in the world. At the bottom of the blog page these changes were unveiled on, it made note that these changes weren't permanent and would be reverted come a time when the world returned to normalcy. And we'll unpack that when we get to it, but this was the gamble. Try and preserve a sense of what the game was and what Niantic wanted it to be, and conform to the wider world around them, while not going bankrupt in the process. The Pokemon Go of 2016 never got to make its own bed. It kinda got thrown off a runaway freight train. But the Pokemon Go of 2019 made its own decisions, for better or worse. This game is now and forever dead. But this one is so much better. So much focus was placed on the in-person elements of Pokemon Go that the online elements felt inadvertently neglected. The player base basically instantly capitulated to all of these changes and promptly began coordinating raids online with each other, leading to thousands of new communities forming. Smartphones are making us less connected? Bullshit. Lamelo just got a shiny Rayquaza from my raid invite, and I've never felt more intimate with another being in my life. Against all logic, and semi-ironically, the strongest point in this game's history was during lockdown, and all that culminated in the summer when the announcement was made for a global Pokemon Go Fest. In most areas of the world, including my own, this was the first time restrictions were lifted since implementation. So going outside after months of isolation, meeting up with friends, and the game gaining such staggering popularity in the months approaching that swaths of people, comparable to summer 2016, all enjoying the same thing you were, it was inadvertently one of the greatest happenings the app could ever hope to produce. Corny as it might, remember these times, because you never know when they're going to end. And you'll hate yourself for not appreciating it when you had the chance.
I don't have a better place to slot this in than here, so those EX raids I mentioned maybe 4 minutes back, they worked by you essentially being invited to them at a specific place and time. The only way you could get this invite was by doing other raids and just kind of hoping you did a raid at the right gym. And out of the however many hundreds of people completed a raid there would only be 10 to 15 invitees. So you had a very limited chance every round of these invites happening, which was maybe once a week to a few times a month. And when these first started happening late in 2017, the EX raid boss you could catch was this guy. If you know anything about this IP, you understand how big of a deal this is. So, when my account first got the invite, I convinced my mom to not only leave her work and sign me out of school, but then drive 20 minutes away at 10:45 a.m. on a Monday morning, where I met up with all these other, nobody older than me by the way, figure that, people to battle the raid with and catch this guy. Then went back to school during lunch with a Little Caesars pizza. I was the coolest motherfucker in the building.
What's up, fucker?
I know saying old good and new bad isn't a sign of the most free-thinking philosophy, but the approximate year around and following this period was definitely the golden era of Pokemon Go. It achieved the biggest synergy of game health, added content, community appeasal, and ecosystem it would ever conjure. The numbers reflected this, with 2020 still being the most successful year of the game's life cycle. But it's where we get to now that bubble finally pops.
We have main engine start, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
On June 21st, 2021, preceding its announcement by 466 days, the notice of reversal for the game's implemented COVID bonuses was made, but not yet implemented. The blog post was structured in such a way that most players didn't even realize this change was announced. Instead, the brunt of it was about adding new benefits to exploration in the game, and buried down here was the actual writing of these features' removal. It stated this change wouldn't be made until August 1st, which by that time those who didn't know this was coming were outraged, and those that did had mostly forgotten. A perspective someone could be lured into about this is, well, they clearly stated these changes were temporary to subsidize the pandemic, so what's the problem with them doing as they intended? Well, a few things, but primarily that in August 2021, the pandemic wasn't even over yet. All of these places still had lockdown restrictions ongoing, and all of these places had significant restrictions concurrently, mostly heavy on recreational activities outdoors, like maybe a mobile game. Second, of course they're entitled to change the game how they want to. It's not the act of them changing it back that's the problem. It's that they had 15 months to realize these changes weren't just supplemental, they just made the game better. I can't tell you the number of instances where the 40-meter interaction radius would lead to me being out of range of something I'm standing right in front of because of GPS drift, or it just straight up not knowing where I am. The buffer of an extra 40 meters mediated that while still definitely requiring exploration, or however Niantic put it. This wasn't something people were manipulating. I live in the remnants of suburbia. I'm within 80 meters of fuck all. The incense was only semi-reverted, losing its increased standstill effectiveness but keeping its extended duration. I do agree a change to its then current form was justified, but a spawn every 45 seconds back to every 5 minutes for a premium item that's primary use case was attracting Pokemon while standing still was grossly over-restrictive.
The incense was never for people on the go. I mean, despite that being the original purpose, what this item eventually turned into during the beginning of the 2020 pandemic was an effective way to play from home.
The rest of the COVID changes were kept or now irrelevant, including the remote raid pass, which, while going untouched, was given specific mention to be under evaluation to find the right balance between remote play and in-person play. So August 1st rolls around, and no less than 6 hours into these reversions, the entire community was fucking rioting.
Not right. This is not cool. This is fucking bullshit.
Don't ever fucking film me. I'm gonna kick the shit out of you.
Within days, the game had its most prominent news cycle in over 4 years, and the community had umbrellaed under a movement to reverse the change, boasting a petition with 196,000 signatures. On August 5th, Niantic had their response. Not a double down on their decision, but a declaration that they had hired a task force to investigate and report the issue of the stop radius and incense.
What? What are you talking about?
Looking back at this, it's actually pretty hilarious this was their acknowledgement. I can't even think of another instance of something like this happening that wasn't an actual criminal investigation or fucking YouTube drama. The takeaway here was maybe too obvious. We hear you guys, but we don't trust you. There was some positive outpouring that they at the very least didn't just ignore it, but to a lot of people this created a permanent ridge between the community and Niantic. One that persisted even after this task force statement on September 1st, where officially the interaction radius was permanently increased to 80 meters, and incense remained in its reworked state. It wasn't the smoothest road to this destination, but everyone was happy with this decision. For 7 months, because after that they reverted it back.
Fuck you.
So maybe the whole task force thing was just to buy time and let backlash die down while also passing blame. But at this point, maybe you're thinking, what are you even complaining about anymore? It's an item in a mobile game that barely affects anything. How entitled are these people? The primary demographic of this game is Nintendo fans. We are dealing with a group of people who valorize the concept of being treated like shit and then acting entitled. I digress, yeah, the whole thing flared up again. Niantic and the Pokemon Go player base are alike in a lot of ways, though they never want to admit it. Both have a little too much of an ego and see the other as an infant baby incapable of coherent thought or capabilities. In this same situation where the incense has been nerfed, Niantic thinks they'll get a few days of backlash and boycott comments, some outspoken articles from D-list websites, and everyone begrudgingly moves on within a week, with none of this affecting their bottom line. The community thinks Niantic have already demonstrated they don't know how to handle this game and that they will give in to social pressure with enough backlash. So as a result, both sides are now deadlocked at making and ignoring as much noise as possible, barreling directly at each other, and forget chicken, I don't think either one even knows how to blink. This incense Cold War goes on for months. Every social post from here to the end of the year is 50% or more comments about reverting the incense. Obviously, a game and its fanbase this at odds with each other isn't a fruitful endeavor, but is any of this really that irregular in the gaming space? Players and developers' visions for a game misalign all the time, and complaining isn't exclusive to anything, that's most online exchanges. What is so uniquely terrible about Niantic compared to other game developers? Did you know Niantic isn't even really a game publisher? Maybe that's why they're so bad at it. In their own words, their company uses technology to draw people into the world, and precisely maps and understands the world to power immersive real-world AR. They're an augmented reality software company, charading as a game company because the game they make is where their money comes from. Before Go, Niantic's manpower mostly went towards modeling Google Maps, things like Street View. Eventually, Niantic subsidized from Google and got to work on their own projects. Their first game, way back in 2012, named Field Trip, was an AR mapping tool that would direct you to interesting places in your community, kinda like a tour guide. Typical gimmicky early 2010s app, shut down in 2019. Ingress was their first independent project with some notoriety to it.
I'm just going to be honest with you. I left that part in the script outlined to finish later. It is now like the Friday before I'm going to upload this, and I didn't finish it. It doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't fucking matter.
It did okay, but also shut down in 2019. However, was later re-released under the name Ingress Prime. Remember, Niantic was a small company at this time, so they didn't have the systems in place to truly innovate how they wanted, or the backing of another company to help fund them. Once these barriers faded with the success of Go, however, their future projects would only grow greater in ambition. Their first follow-up was Harry Potter Wizards Unite. It was like Pokémon Go, but with Harry Potter. Launched in 2019, died in 2022. Definitely a wrong place, wrong time sort of case. After that came Transformers Heavy Metal. How catchy. It was like Pokémon Go, but with Transformers. It launched in 2021, and then like most Transformers-related endeavors, died hardly even a year after. NBA All-World, like Pokémon Go, launched 2022, died 2023. Marvel World of Heroes, Pokémon Go but Marvel. Truffle, literally just Field Trip again. Peridot, I don't even know what this is. Monster Hunter Now and Pikmin Bloom are their only arguable success stories since Pokémon Go. To which I'd say even if these games were sustainable without a billion-dollar sugar daddy, excuse my plagiarism here, but if an airline landed 3 of their last 10 planes successfully, I wouldn't think to go around bragging about it. This isn't a smear campaign to bring up as many failures of this company as I can. There's no retribution to be felt in hundreds of people losing their jobs. I just see this pattern of a company bringing in all this money off a bigger IP than trying to capitalize as much and as fast as possible by trying to reuse this same formula over and over, basically going, explore the world with, then insert a popular brand, or even their own properties, but still hitting the same formulaic plateau they've been on for 9 years at this point. Niantic thinks they have an audience because of the great game they've made. They do not. The part of their game that got everybody here was the IP. The part they brought to the table was the AR. If you have semi-recently on any basis played this game, how integral do you think that AR technology is? Here's a pro tip for those of you that can't stare at a screen without engagement for 5 seconds.
Please tell me it's always like this. No, we're not always watching the Game Awards.
When going to catch a Pokemon, toggle this button into AR mode and hold down the berry button in the bottom left while simultaneously throwing your ball. Once contact with the model is made and the capture animation begins, slide your finger on the berry button to the middle of the screen, tap the screen again, and exit the animation with the run button to skip the cutscene. I would wager this trick, spanning all of 2 seconds, is the most use of AR in this game for 95% of players. Outside of situations where the feature is made mandatory, every instance of AR in this game is an optional gimmick. The only reason it's used here is because it's quicker by maybe a second. But you know what? I say all this while not even being in that 95% because I kinda think it rules. AR photography was maybe the most fun I had the last year or so I played Pokemon Go. But I also recognize this is completely separate to the rest of the game and holds no bearing whatsoever. It's a side feature no more than the photo modes in the main games, and it's the keystone primary addition Niantic brings to their own title. I know a lot of this is more akin to a deranged rant than a resourceful outlook on this game or company because, well, it is. As much as and trust me, I'm moved on, it pisses me off how they took this thing I loved and then shot it over and over and over and over and over.
When I wanted to do legendary raids back then, like way back when, summer 2017, I'd ask my mom to drive around to different gyms that had Moltres or Lugia or whatever it was until we stumbled on a group of players also there for the raid. And eventually, we'd always find this one group of maybe 15 guys and 6 or so cards, and all day they'd drive from raid to raid with a map of the city showing all the raid timers, like real kick-ass shit. And I'd always ask my mom if we could follow them around because I was a literal child with no concept of the kind of time I was wasting. So we'd always pull up and ask them where to next, and they'd shout back a street name that maybe we knew, or maybe we'd quickly look up and meet them there. Or other times when I just couldn't be paraded around all afternoon, I was allowed to drive around with this posse, I suppose. Since, yeah, after a certain point, we had become acquainted that it wasn't like that weird. It wasn't just like a stranger's car. Honestly, in hindsight, how I wasn't molested kind of baffles me.
One of the unique challenges of developing a game using real-world locations is geography itself playing a part in how you can run it. Most games, when releasing an update or starting an event, just do it globally. Niantic typically rolls theirs out over the course of a day, starting at the same hour in each time zone. That means when something goes live in New Zealand, it's still 19 hours away from going live in the Americas. An effect of this is if you live over here and a raid boss starts appearing over here, you can start remote raiding it the night before. But if you live over here, I didn't make the time to do the math on this because I don't hate myself, but from 2021 to 2023, based on what I and others remember, roughly 1 of every 3 events, which happened multiple times a week, would go live in some aspect, big or small, broken. Oceanic countries would have to complain about it, and it would be fixed typically by around here. Sometimes it wasn't a big deal, maybe a move couldn't be taught into a Pokemon, or Sunkern was missing from the spawn table. Other times, they would forget to release the advertised shiny of the event for 7 hours, and no hyperbole, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of raids would be done by those trying to get it, only to find out it was impossible. Just so we're being 100% clear, thousands of people put thousands of dollars into an online application for an unspecified chance of winning something, only for said thing to have been unobtainable, and all of this undisclosed. Does this remind you of anything?
Let's go gambling!
Speaking of, none of the shiny odds were disclosed ever in this game. That's fine in the main series where there aren't microtransactions for every encounter you want to do and the odds are consistent, but in Go, typical odds are 1 in 512 with some specific species having a permanent booster rate of 1 in 64, but certain events like Community Days boost these numbers to 1 in 25, Research Days to 1 in 10, Legendaries are always 1 in 20 except when they're 1 in 10, or 0 like we just talked about. GoFest boost everything that's 1 in 512 to 1 in 125, and 1 in 64 stay at that unless they're in the egg pool where they can go to 1 in 10, they're sometimes 1 in 50, but then Gibble is apparently always 1 in 133, and Unknowns? Oh my god, they're shiny locked unless it's GoFest, then they're 1 in 64, but only if it's a Pacific location event. If it's a global spawning GoFest, then they're the full 1 in 512, and Megas in the wild are 1 in 64, even if their earlier lineage is 1 in 512. Also, all of these numbers are guesses from community collected data sets, and Niantic has never made any of these numbers clearer than, I don't know, you might find a shiny one. Somebody tell me right hand to God how any of this isn't a literal illegal lottery. Other games and websites have been shut down and sued for exactly this practice. I haven't even mentioned the in-game bundles yet. Inflation is real and it looks like this. And when any of this would be brought up directly to an employee of Niantic, not someone blasting their social media, but an actual confrontation in an interview, their response would exceed no more than an acknowledgement of, we aren't doing this maliciously, but those problems do exist and we don't really care to do anything about them. That's not me interpreting their words and being incredulous, that's essentially verbatim the point they meant to get across.
It is one of those things that's kind of just the unfortunate way that the world is set up where, you know, you happen to be in the first time zone and so there's no way around that part of it. I don't think the team at Niantic is happy with the quality level that we've been able to execute at. But again, to your earlier point about listening to player feedback and whatnot, I do think that there were some valid criticisms about some of the gaps that were introduced. You know, I know we're not a perfect company by any means.
In fact, the quote to this day I remember the most from an interview at the end of March 2023 with the director of software at Niantic as to why these grievances went unresolved went as so. Generally speaking, the number of people who will be affected on a day-to-day basis is a relatively small part of folks who play our game. The median player of Pokemon Go is probably someone like a Singaporean grandma who walks with her senior group for 30 to 60 minutes every morning as part of her exercise and social routine. See a Singaporean grandma do that. To try and construct a psychological profile of this company would be like trying to psychoanalyze a warhead. We're kind of willingly misunderstanding the point here. It doesn't do based on anything other than a set of instructions, and boom. This badly a bastardization of a concept is frustrating. Not by its merit, but because there isn't even an explanation as to why. It wasn't really for greed, it wasn't hubris, it doesn't even seem like bad luck. Just misstep after misstep of illogical negligences and the doubling down of those decisions. And the final nail in that coffin, the decision that instantly and eternally sent this game over the side of the bell curve, its downward spiral, is the last thing I want to talk about.
I'm not going to say any names here because you don't know any of them, but a perk of a geographically centralized multiplayer game is the players aren't random personalities at their computers. You're usually face-to-face with them, which meant whenever people weren't happy with the game, being all the time, they indirectly weren't happy with you either. I remember during all this back around 2022, 2023, all the inner circles of my city's community, the game-oriented conversations were solely negative because that was the community's consensus at that point. Or it was a circle jerk of trying to one-up each other of who caught the rarest thing that day. And not in a fun, like, look what I found kind of way, like maliciously, like tauntingly. Even. It was exhausting. Many people wouldn't even talk to others unless it was about what shiny they'd found. I had people confide in me, and this is literally using their words here, that they hated another person for the Pokemon they were catching that they did not. Do you know how ludicrously, lambastically childish that statement is? And admittedly, I catch myself thinking like that at times, and it wasn't fun. It contextualized to me that the whole experience wasn't fun anymore, let alone just the gameplay. And it was I guess it was around then that I decided I wanted to stop playing, but was operating on such a sunk cost fallacy that giving this up would be like giving up such a massive, like, hours a day for the last 7 years of my life, massive part of my life. But eventually, I think, February 2023, I did quit. And yeah, evidently, I haven't thought much about it since. Much. Fuck.
February 20th, 2023 saw a mistake so inconsequential, yet equally game-imploding, it was essentially Schrodinger's fuck-up. It wasn't a functional difference, or even easy to notice, and by every facet, had zero nominal impact on the game. But it kickstarted one of the costliest decisions in video game history. The remote raid pass had a seemingly accidental update to its item description. Before reading as a pass to join a raid battle remotely, now contained the additional little tidbit of, can only use X amount per day. It was removed later the same day, but that was a non-factor in players' reactions. Even the idea of this change being considered was enough of a linchpin to light the now seemingly annual barge fire beneath Niantic. Now, to be clear, these things were absolutely overpowered from a game balancing stance. They could let you catch 50 Groudon in a day without leaving your couch. In particular, the experience they gave was so egregious, it meant one of the only distinctions made between high and low level players was how many remote raids they would do. There was definitely a meaningful nerf necessary, but the item was also so integrated into the game's economy that if nerfed too hard, it could leave a power vacuum of hundreds of millions of dollars. So on March 30th, 2023, here's what Niantic came up with. They doubled the price and set their daily limit from infinite to 5.
Without question, the worst mistake that Niantic made.
This can literally kill They don't really care about accessibility, they don't care about what makes the game better.
This is absolutely
the most disappointing thing since my son.
Of everything gone over to this point, nothing had received more backlash than this, and never had Niantic bent to it less. The provided reasoning was keeping the integrity of our mission to encourage exploration. Yeah, I hope this bullet keeps the integrity of my frontal lobe. Following this, the game's quarter and yearly revenue plummeted, and lesser so player count, but that difference in incline demonstrates how hyperinflated this game's economy was by remote raids. Niantic tried to combat this with a campaign of updates meant to encourage more exploration. Features coming months or even years after with routes and overworld rehaul and avatar change. What the fuck? Niantic had spent Pokemon Go's entire lifespan trying to get the game back to its limelight in 2016, and every decision they made was backwards because of it. They didn't trust any feature other than raids to get people outside like in 2016 again, despite the 3 years of evidence before the conception of remote raids that very much showed they couldn't. If I had anything more to say about this decision, there is a tiny part of me that respects the philosophy-based rationale given, that maybe real, tangible morals are what drove Niantic to end the remote raid experiment. I doubt less so those morals were worth over $600 million. People threw around allegations that Nintendo themselves demanded this change, citing home integration balance, or they wanted to sell more location data, but honestly, the less said about that, the better.
Get the fuck out of my sight before I demolish you.
Did the game truly die, or did any part of it ever recover? Truthfully, I don't know, because I stopped paying attention. And so we're left with modern-day Pokemon Go. In of itself, you wouldn't outright call it bad, but the secondhand contempt felt just for playing it has never been worse. Other tactics to subsidize this monotonous vacuum were to just paywall anything and everything. Every free event held previously would now have tickets for optimal experiences, like more XP, candy incentives, research lines, and counters. Granted, they were never malicious enough to detract from the free experiences, for the most part, but it definitely made the collective game flow feel cheaper. You couldn't explicitly say these tickets were gatekeeping any one feature, as anything bought was fairly advertised as extra incentive, but you could definitely premise that just a few years earlier this all would have been included in a ticket-free experience. A digital store was launched for the in-game currency that offered unique deals and bonuses on purchases, and also notably completely dodged Apple's 30% App Store purchase tax, which is a totally immoral and anti-capitalist loophole that definitely shouldn't be used in conjunction with spoofing technology to sandbag hundreds of dollars worth of in-game currency via a much weaker economy. I'm winking through the microphone. There was also very obvious attempts to incorporate a battle pass into the game, a bigger slate of high-tier events, about 100 new costumes in all likelihood. Look, maybe the worst kept secret with these kind of games is they keep pumping meaningless new stuff into them so you don't feel pressured not to miss out on something, except that something is the equivalent of a cardboard box on a stick at the end of a trail of candy. These gameplay loops can be a good thing, but loops kind of gives away the fact we're going in circles. At the end of the day, this is Pokemon we're talking about, so it's always going to keep a sizable following, but culturally, outwardly, and internally, the writing on the wall couldn't be clearer. Parody doesn't feel like the right word, it's more of a jaded impression. An old recognizable building you've seen on the side of the road for years, but never gone inside, so it just kind of exists as a mental think piece on how you perceive the time and space around it. For years now, the advice I gave anyone still trying to play was, well, if it's still fun for you, suck it up. My reasoning was, no matter how colloquially shit on this app became, there wasn't a company on Earth besides Niantic within the parameters to keep the game running. So you were stuck with them. And I honestly, gutturally believed that. When I started conceptualizing this video, I knew the more interesting story to tell would be Niantic's and not the game's, but seeing as I removed myself from these works years ago, truthfully I had no idea how this story would end. On March 12th, 2025, Niantic sold Pokémon Go to another company and shut down its entire gaming division. Niantic was a company that was founded in 2011 and died in 2025, and its entire life tried in vain to find its identity. Their cute little website and their PR people would give you the same corporate spiel of we're building an augmented future in the metaverse or some bullshit, but their actions showed you what they actually were. They were scared and unsure of themselves and really bad at playtesting, and those traits make them seem human and vulnerable, but not in a way that gets me to empathize. No, it's in a way that's mean because they don't even come across like they're trying. It's hard to stay in a relationship where it only feels like one of you is trying. You know, this whole funeral bit is completely stolen from an episode of a Netflix show called BoJack Horseman. Highly recommend, just give the second season a chance. The first isn't great, but in that show, spoilers, I guess, the entire series revolves around this anthropomorphic talking horse. And it's like, no, that's so funny. He keeps doing all these people things, but as a horse, the point is, he keeps making these mistakes. And it's hurting the people around him, but he also acts like he wants to be better. So you're stuck wanting to root for this guy, for him to improve and to be better, but he keeps letting you down. And that lack of dependability, that idea of this thing you love that over and over again treats you like shit and offers nothing but words of apathy in the place of their actions, that's Niantic. I haven't deleted the app. I didn't feel like I had to move on or anything, but a part of me does still yearn for it. I know if I did start playing again, it wouldn't be the same, and it definitely wouldn't last, but I miss how I felt when I did, when every day I was excited to catch something, going out every weekend for whatever community day or event was happening. Not in a way where I'm nostalgic, that's not the right word. In a way where, even though it wasn't meant to be in my life forever, I wish I cherished it a little more when it was. I think my biggest regret with the game is not living in the moment enough, that all the best parts of it, I didn't take them in, I didn't hold on to that enough, and now those moments are gone, and I can't ever get them back. I think that's what I hate about it the most, not the uncertain mediocrity of its future, but the loss of its past. Like, here, the oldest thing in my account, it's a Lapras from August 2016. No, I didn't keep my starter. Starters are a marketing ploy designed to sell reboots in a decade's time. One time on a drive home well past dusk, it was on my nearby radar, and me and my sister yelled at Mother Dearest to pull over so we could go find it. We were on the highway. Anyway, we find, I think, a tire store parking lot off to an exit, and I run across the highway where the road was leveled in a way where it was basically at the bottom of a ditch. So I go and I climb up this miniature man-made cliffside into an empty, dimly lit parking lot of a highway-adjacent townhouse, so it's a miracle I haven't been shoved in a trunk yet, and, well, I find the Lapras there. And I mean, it's just a Lapras, you think of that today, it's whatever, but the reason that first summer was so special for the game is because just a Lapras meant so much. It was never a formula built to last, but it was the whimsy of Pokemon in its purest, least conglomerate mutilated form. And every edition after, every new shiny and legendary and event, it maybe made for a better game, but not a better experience. Anyway, I run back down the man-melded ditch across the highway to tell them where the Lapras was. They didn't follow me, by the way. My family just saw me run onto a highway in complete darkness and not resurfaced for maybe 5 minutes. But, you know, we drove around to the lot where they could catch it. And, well, I don't think that story's particularly great, but I love it so much because I remember it so clearly. And stories like that from that time in your life get rarer and harder to find the more time passes. I can only imagine how obnoxious this is for someone watching who doesn't give a shit about my take and just wanted to know about the game. How disindulgent of me. In my defense, I wouldn't have even made this video if the game didn't mean anything to me, which is like how most things happen. Like, unless you're a network greenlighting garbage to fill airwaves on the Titanic swan song that is cable or streaming television, most people only make things because they're passionate about them. Although I don't know if that was ever true about Niantic. I never felt they cared about Pokemon Go any more than it was their money printer, like it was just another product for them, and that's what I keep going back to. Why didn't you care? You had the most viral application on the world's biggest quantity of devices, backed by the biggest IP and gaming company in the world, and you couldn't have given a shit. I gave you 7 years of my life. I think maybe it's wrong to expect connection and clarity out of a company. They don't actually owe anyone anything, it's just a goods industry. Maybe the bit here isn't that Niantic's a bad company, it's that I'm too parasocial with them. I mean, it's easy enough to portray this terrible greedy company when all I've talked about are their lowlights, but that's what sticks out about them. That's what killed them to me. That's what killed them to me. This whole thing was really just about me, wasn't it? The truth is, Niantic isn't dead, and neither is Pokemon Go. It's hard to call a game with over 7 million monthly users dead by any context. I just made that misgiving because in my eyes and experiences, it basically was as such. A lot of this video was a way for me to reconcile my time with this game, to have something to show or have learned from the thousands of hours put into it. But it's unrealistic to have that expectation about experiences in life. Typically all they can ever be is what you lived of them, and you have to hope that, by the end, that's enough. So if that's the case against Niantic, then what's the verdict? What's the big, profound, paradoxical lesson at the end of this I've conjured up for narrative satisfaction? Well, I mean, who am I to say? I'm just a fucking nobody.